Other-Terrestrial, Season 1, Episode 2, Vitriol, by Nolan Conray.
Computers now have primary control.
Brooks came onto the bridge without a word. Logus and Early were there, and after a moment he realized that Kell was also there, standing and leaning against the wall. It was strange, considering the dramatic effect of his presence upon them all when he'd arrived. He wondered just how much the Shoggoth could suppress that strange quality it possessed. Sitting down, Brooks gestured to the two men. "I'd like to hear your reports before I begin," he said. "This colony is in a bad way," Early said. "I went out with my kids and we explored some of the markets. There's a lot of desperation and poor health. They seem to have an elevated case incidence of cancers and little ability to treat them. I didn't feel like we were in danger, but we were also in an area clearly intended for outsiders." Logus spoke next. "I agree. I took a brief walk and attempted to access what public systems I could. They have very little in the way of education systems. Frankly, it's bizarre how little there seems to be. For a colony of 30,000, there should be more children, and I didn't see any." "Actually, I didn't either," Early noted. "What do you think is the source of their cancer epidemic?" Brooks asked. "Radiation," Early said without hesitation. "I can't prove it without looking at the outside of the colony, but I think their radiation shielding must be damaged or inadequate, and they lack the workforce to fix it." "I think that some people suspect that at least," Logus said. "I saw desperation in many, and one man tried to barter his way onto our ship to leave." Brooks' eyes widened in surprise. "What did you tell him?" "That I would talk to you about it," Logus said. "What do you want me to tell him?" Brooks had to consider that. "I'm not against it, but I am concerned that if we take one person, then too many will want to go. The governor is wanting more people to come, not for us to be taking them out." "You don't think he'll consider an evacuation?" Early asked. "Having people who want to leave trapped on a colony is a very bad thing. It can lead to unrest and even violence if allowed to fester." They all knew the stories, all very real, of colonies that had destroyed themselves with internal strife. Violent terrorists were a whole new level of dangerous when a large enough bomb could end up venting thousands into space, whether it was what the bombers intended or not. "I think we're already at that point," Brooks said. "But I don't think the governor is wanting to give up. He wants to barter our CR for our help in making this colony dominate the system." Logus frowned, rubbing his chin. "That seems in line with what I saw in the welcoming. How far do you think he'll go to secure what he wants?" "I'm not sure," Brooks replied. "He backed down when I made it clear that I wasn't going to work around official channels, but I feel certain that he'll bring it up again. I have an appointment to talk with him again in the morning, so I'll know more at that time." Brooks looked to Early. "After I go to that meeting, I'd like to keep everyone on the ship until I return, just to make sure he can't get any unofficial leverage against us." Early's brow furrowed with concern. "You really think this could escalate, Captain?" "Yes," Brooks said. "It could. As silly as it all seems, to someone in the governor's shoes, this could be his Hail Mary. Logus arched an eyebrow. I'm not familiar with that term. Old Earth phrase, Brooks said. That means a desperate last attempt at victory. Something unlikely to work, but you feel you have nothing left to lose, so you gamble. Early exchanged a worried glance with Logus. I'll be sure the defense grid is kept on max. Brooks nodded. Good. Also, I'd like to send a message back to the Craton. New Vitriol should have a transmitter. They do, Logus said. I saw a sign pertaining to it. However, the fees are astronomical. I imagine we can afford it, Brooks replied. Is there some other problem? Yes, Logus continued. They monitor all outgoing transmissions. The citizen I spoke to seemed to believe so completely, at least. Our code should be quite secure, Early replied, but the problem is going to be on the sending end. If they require us to input message into a terminal there, they do, Logus said. Then they can just literally observe us punching in a message, Early finished. We could always insist on something more secure, but that will bring questions of its own. And if they insist that all outgoing messages must be screened, well, there's a legal gray area there, and we'll have an uphill battle. Then we won't bother with secrecy, Brooks decided. We can use this to our advantage. Send a message that says that the situation is proceeding well, then ask how many new civilians have joined the ship. What about the repair status? Logus asked. Shouldn't the ship be nearly ready? It would be nice to have her come as backup. No, we won't mention it at all, Brooks replied. Just ask about the new arrivals, Early. Understood, sir. Logus glanced between them, slightly puzzled. You wanted to look to the governor like you're considering his request, asking how many people we might be able to spare, he realized. I'm giving him nothing but a hope. It should keep him from taking any drastic actions. Brooks stood. If there's nothing else, I'm going to get some rest. Let me know if anything happens. One last thing, Captain, Early said. Everyone has returned to the ship, except for Pyrrha and Sens. Brooks stopped and checked his system for the local time. It was 20:30. There's still time for them to return, he noted. All the same, I'm somewhat concerned. I tried raising them on the comm, but there was no answer. And at one point, I detected a similar signal to our ship's own tracker. Now, that can be a result of deflected signals off veins of certain minerals, but it could also be that someone was creating it to lure them away. Logus looked concerned as well. Regardless of the cause, that could have drawn them in the wrong direction at the very least. Brooks felt his unease increase. If they haven't reported back by 21:30, we'll conduct a search in the immediate area. Keep trying to raise them. If they aren't back by curfew, sir? Early asked. Brooks frowned. Then I'll have to speak to the governor about it. As Brooks left, Logus took his leave as well. Kell moved to follow the doctor out. It had been uncharacteristically silent this whole time, to the point that Early had almost forgotten about its presence. Almost. One moment, Ambassador. I need to speak with you about what happened in the market. Kell glanced back to him. It is unimportant. Respectfully, Ambassador, it's not. You terrified that woman. Now Kell turned to face him squarely. I spoke the truth. You did, Early said. But you need to consider not just the time of how to communicate something like that, but how you broach the subject. I am under no obligation to listen to this, Kell replied. No, you aren't, Early agreed. But you would do well to listen to me. You are an ambassador. I get the feeling, Kell, that the title is merely a means to an end for you. Kell had looked as if he would simply walk away, but now his eyes narrowed. I would consider your next words carefully, Executive Commander. I understand fully the ramifications, Early said, and that no one else is prepared to tell you this, but you need to know it. You represent your people, Kell. Every action you take reflects upon every other Shoggoth. It also reflects upon the Sapient Union. You have a responsibility to both. Kell gazed at him silently for long moments. He did not blink. His eyes did not flicker even the slightest, and Early felt a chill go down his spine. But he met the ambassador's gaze and didn't shrink away. I'll take what you say under advisement, Kell finally said. Nevertheless, you presume much, Executive Commander. You believe I act without care, but you do not understand just what it is I have sacrificed to be here. He turned away, moving to the door. It opened for him, but he stopped there. Your kind live such short lives, he said. Well, true, we don't like to be reminded of our own mortality, Early replied. Kel ignored that. But the people here, their lives are shorter still, much like in the past. Early found himself flat-footed against Kel's observation. It was true, absolutely true, but it didn't seem the sort of thing the Shoggoth would care about. Yes, he replied. I believe this colony is in very poor health. Can they be helped? Kel asked. Technically, yes, we have the capabilities to improve their quality of life, to heal their conditions. In practice, I don't know. We can't help them if they don't want us to. Would you help if they allowed it? Kel asked. Yes, Early replied without hesitation. Kel mulled on this for a few moments in silence. Without another word, he left, the door closing behind him. The tram doors opened into a tunnel that was, she thought, the cleanest and best maintained they'd seen in the entire colony thus far. That didn't mean a lot. While it appeared clean, her sensors noted a higher than expected level of bacterial growth upon the surfaces. Disgusting, she muttered as she took a handhold to begin moving down the hallway. Don't worry, Pyrrha, Sen said. None of these bacteria are known to be able to colonize a moth owl. Thanks, she replied. Still didn't make it any less gross, but it was good to know. Bacterial infections were one of the most frightening potential occurrences from interspecies contact. While viruses were absolutely bound within one planet's life forms, bacteria could theoretically, and occasionally did, find the conditions in life from another world quite hospitable. The resulting colonizations could cause rapid debilitation or death. Her sensors didn't detect any security systems or really anything, but there was a heat source ahead. I see it too, Sens replied after she pointed it out. Let us head that way. Pyrrha took point, keeping ahead of Sens as they began down the hallway. She kept her sidearm out. She did not want to be caught unprepared again. Her wing still stung where the crazed man had pulled a feather. You know, there is something that has been bothering me, Sens said. Pyrrha tensed, feeling oddly nervous about what he was about to say. This colony makes very little sense, and I do not simply mean the oddness of the name or their behavior to outsiders. I have been looking over public logs I downloaded upon our arrival, of arrivals and departures of ships. Oh, she said, entirely caught off guard by the topic. It had not been at all what she'd been expecting. Yes, and while this colony does trade, they do not export as much as I would expect. We cannot know the exact contents of each ship, but by sheer quantities alone, I would think there would be much more bulk exports. Phosphorus is among the more precious commodities a colony like this would have to trade. For agriculture and people in the rest of the system. Correct, Sens replied. The other colonies likely have a very high demand for it due to their rapid population growths. This place doesn't seem to have much growth at all, Pyrrha noted. I get the feeling it's a dying colony. Yes, much is made in their local culture of the phosphorus mining. So where is it going? And yet, despite this relatively small export amount, they have taken in very large imports of industrial equipment of an unknown nature. Mining equipment to exploit the phosphorus more? Pyrrha ventured. That would have been my guess, but the mining equipment we've seen is of very low quality and appears very aged. I guess they're getting screwed over in their trading, Pyrrha replied. All I can imagine. Perhaps. My second thought was perhaps it was equipment to alleviate their food shortages. Yet we clearly see no signs of large hydroponics. By my observations, they are subsisting largely on algae paste, the most basic of survival foods for a colony. It's certainly unpleasant stuff, she said. I've had the Desai version, and I don't envy any being having to live on it. I will be honest that I like it just fine, Sens said. But then, what I consider appealing, I've been told, reminds many humans of something they call fish flakes. Pyrrha let out a whistling laugh as she neared a corner. I've always wondered what you ate. I've seen you in the officers' mess at lunchtime, but you never seem to be eating. Oh, that's simply because I enjoy the social nature of the lunch period, Sens said. Wait, so you're saying you go to lunch just to talk to... As she trailed off, Sens stopped. Pyrrha, is something wrong? I found the power source, she said. The corner led to a large open doorway. The room beyond was mostly smooth stone, but equipment filled most of the available space, attached to both floor and ceiling. tall, clear tubes capped with equipment. Beyond this room, she saw other large doorways that opened to even more cavernous chambers containing the same tubes. In each of them, floating in liquid, were humans. Many were on the small side, only partially grown. Clones. Ah, Sen said, his voice bleak. I suppose this is where the phosphorus is going. Her fingers flexed on the grip of her sidearm. She felt naked in the cloning chamber. Though the cloning tubes provided cover, likely very valuable cover to the colonists, they did not provide any concealment. Right now there did not appear to be anyone else present. There wasn't a lot of need, other than the occasional check-in. The systems that ran the place were high-spec and seemed able to work on their own once set up and provided with raw materials. Phosphorus is essential for human growth, especially of bones and teeth, Sens was saying. A solution that contains it is therefore vital for the cloning process. I can sort of see a logic. The governor clearly decided to help boost their population by simply creating more workers. Still, it's a very questionable decision. It's a horrible decision, Pierre replied sourly. They're barely feeding their current population. How are they going to feed these? I presume the governor feels he can ramp up the algae paste production to meet demand. I agree, though, that this is a foolhardy move. Something born out of desperation. And stupidity. Is it me, or do these clones look unhealthy? Pierre pressed her face to the tube, looking at the human within. It surprised her for a moment how warm the glass was. It was male, though overall it appeared there were more females. While she knew humans grew in a curled position, the spine on this one appeared too curved, to the point where he would have a hunched back. Even the man's head looked smaller than it should have been. You're quite correct. From what I've seen, I would estimate that 60% of these clones will not survive to maturity. Among those that do, most will suffer severe physical and mental impairments. Pierre pulled away from the glass. 60%? She clicked out a curse that gave Sen's pause. I have no idea what you just said. You're better off not knowing, she replied. But that death rate is horrifying. Shouldn't it be a fraction of a percent at most? Yes, under optimal conditions, the death rate is small, even if it is frequently unethical. But the colonists are doing things that are unusual, such as attempting to alter the genomes of the clones. I believe their goal is to create enough variation in the population to prevent inbreeding. Pierre shook her head. Atrocious. I wonder what... A clanking noise came from outside and down the hall. Cover, she hissed. Sens was already ducking to move behind one of the larger pieces of machinery. Several someones were approaching. Setting her grip on her sidearm, she angled a small sensor out around the corner to watch. The view appeared in her HUD, and unless they were actively scanning, it was unlikely their own systems would notice it. 3 men entered the room. They had the emblem of colony security and were in full kit. A thread of fear went through her. Unlike the sloppy guards she'd seen in the rest of the colony, these men moved like professionals. They were certainly no strangers to zero-G combat, and were holding rifles that would rip through the suits she or Sens had on with ease. Their armor would be proof against her sidearm if it came to violence. Only a lucky shot, or a carefully aimed one, would have a chance of taking one down. They didn't say anything, but checking for comm signals, she found that they were using an encrypted frequency. A message appeared on her HUD, from Sens. They're using a simple code. I'm in their channel, sharing now. She heard a voice crackle in her ear. Their audio was clear, but she couldn't tell one speaker from another. Passive detectors noted heat signatures. Not one of ours, one said. His clipped tones didn't sound local. A mercenary, perhaps. Too much heat from the cloning tubes at living temperatures to pick out an intruder. Fan out and find them. The second voice had a different accent, but likewise did not sound local. Do you think it's the Xenos? The third did sound local, but had adopted the more professional tones of his allies. She knew that meant they'd trained together for some time. He was not likely to be a rookie. Possibly. They disappeared from the Hunter Squad hours ago. Shoot if you see them. We're taking no chances. Even dead, they have uses. The one she took to be the commander said. The governor said... Another cut in. The local. Screw him. He's not out here. We don't know what these SU types are packing, but they're armed. I'm not risking my ass for the governor's games. Pyrrha had hated the idea of surrender, but that cut the option out entirely. She studied them for further information, but aside from the colony emblem on their armor, they had no insignia. It was the kind of move that those who had experienced the worst sorts of combat used. They didn't want to make their commanders a clear target, so dressed them the same as the regs. She sent a signal back to Sens. "We don't have a lot of movement options." "We go up the first chance, take to the ceiling," Sens replied. "Human perceptions work best horizontally, not vertically." It was a fair point. Being on another plane would affect neither her nor Sens to any significant degree. It was the barest of advantage, but she'd take all she could get. The three began to spread out, a slow and cautious search pattern, but one that would find them. Her suit estimated 45 seconds. Reaching into her pocket, she felt for something, anything, that she could use as a distraction. As it was, they would be noticed if they attempted to go up. She had to create a noise to draw their attention another way. She felt something hard and pulled it out. Her singing stone. There wasn't time for sentimentality. Pyrrha didn't hesitate, throwing the stone down the row. She sent it at an angle where it hit the base of a tank and ricocheted, hitting another in a zigzag pattern. The stone sang for her as it flew. The sharp, keening cry was like a lament to her kind, and even humans rarely failed to be unnerved by the sorrow in its voice. "What was that?" one of the searchers said immediately. She jumped towards the ceiling. "It's a distraction. They went high." She heard the shout over the comm and knew they'd been spotted. It had been a dim hope to remain fully unobserved. Their sensors would have spotted them, but she'd hoped for a few seconds. "Sends you head for the exit. I'll distract them," she said. "Negative," came his reply. She realized he hadn't jumped when she had. He had remained down below. It made some sense. They had angles that would put the guards at a disadvantage, but that didn't make their weapons any more effective. Then she saw him run out at the nearest soldier. She couldn't see them aim and fire from her cover, but the shots slashed through the coral suit like it was made of paper. They pierced the cloning tank, leaving clean holes that the liquid inside spilled out through. Sens went out of sight, but shots continued to ring. Pyrrha was in shock. Had the coral just sacrificed itself for her? Had it been expecting her to cover it? Before she could even overcome her shock, she heard a scream through the comm. "It's got me!" "It won't go down!" cried another. The shot stopped and she dared to put her sensor over the cover, risking her hand rather than her head. Sens's suit had gaping holes ripped in it, and most of the water had poured out. But through that she could see part of the powered skeleton of the suit still intact. There was nothing else in it. None of the rocky body she had only ever caught glimpses of. And it had one of the soldiers pinned to the wall. As the other two rushed it, she saw something scuttle by below. Chunks of rock held together with thick, pink strands, covered in things that looked like wilted flowers. A pale, clearish plastic suit covered most of it, giving just a glimpse of the rock and polyps beneath. It didn't walk like a human, but crawled with a sprawling gait, like a bizarre spider. They were flashing patterns, and she was shocked as her system provided an audible translation. "Run, Pyrrha!" She kicked off the ceiling and grabbed a bar on the side of the piece of equipment to swing herself around and give her the momentum to head towards the door. Letting go, she began to sail through the air. "Behind!" the voice came over the comm signal. She saw the two begin to turn, their rifles raising. She couldn't hurt them back, but she didn't want to die without at least making a last act of defiance. She raised her own sidearm. Sens lunged for one of them. The man was caught off guard and the coral smashed into him. The other soldier tried to snap his aim to Sens, but when the being came mixed up with his comrade, he began to lift his rifle back towards Pyrrha. She couldn't take him out of the fight, but she could neutralize his weapon. Her sidearm barked once, twice, 3 times. The first 2 shots hit the man's armor, bouncing off and doing no harm. But the third itself hit his rifle. Gouging into the side, it deflected off the barrel, but the soldier bit out a curse and dropped the weapon, shoving it away as the chamber flashed and it misfired. The man stumbled back and Pyrrha hit the floor hard on her shoulder as the path from the ceiling finally brought her to the floor. Pain jolted through her, but she didn't drop her sidearm and shoved off towards the soldiers. Sens was still embroiled with the man, his strange body seeming like it was a match even for the larger human who surely had enhanced muscles. The man's hand was grabbing for something sheathed at his side. A glint of light revealed the knife. Pyrrha didn't know if it could harm the rock that consisted of most of Sens's body, but if he stabbed one of the polyps, a part of Sens would die. Catching a grip bar on a cloning tank with her hand and breaking her momentum with her legs, she swung her sidearm up to the man's neck. "Drop it!" she yelled over an open frequency. The man's helmet tilted towards her, but he didn't drop it. No, he pulled it back for a thrust. She pulled the trigger. Maybe the man was certain his armor would protect him, but at point-blank range, with the muzzle against the thin armor of his neck, it didn't. The round tore through but couldn't pierce the other side. Blowback splattered her hand, and the man went still. Sens let go of him, and Pyrrha raised her handgun to the man she'd disarmed. He had been fumbling for his own sidearm, his composure finally broken, but now he froze. They were only a couple meters apart, and she didn't think her sidearm could pierce his armor at even this range, but the man clearly did not want to risk it. The last one had finally stopped struggling, still pinned by Sens' suit. Sens rose, flashing to her. "Thank you. Good work." Pyrrha nodded. Hopefully he'd understand that, but he was without his own system. She waved to the door for him to go. "Let's go." She'd taken her eyes off the surrendered man and saw a hint of movement. The man was going for his pistol again. "No!" she said. He got it clear of his holster and fired at the same time she pulled the trigger. Nekteed looked shocked. "Two of your people are missing?" he echoed. "That is correct. One of them is my chief science officer, Sens, the alien in my entourage when we met." Brooks studied the man's face, but he appeared genuinely surprised. "And the other?" the governor asked. "Lieutenant Pyrrha, a Desai," Brooks replied. "Another Xeno, huh? They do seem to stick together, don't they?" Brooks scowled. "Surely you can find them with your colony's sensor system." The man laughed. "Oh, Captain, I'm afraid out here we don't have the kinds of resources you have in the Sapient Union. We can't afford a full internal sensor system. At least, not yet." Brooks crossed his arms. "Their disappearance seems remarkably suspicious, Governor. I expect them to return unharmed." "I promise you that my people would never harm them," the man replied. "But I will dispatch some teams to find them, just in case." "Thank you. Tell me, Governor, do you think anyone else in the colony might be a danger to them?" "I trust my people, Captain, but I can't make guarantees. Don't forget that I have enemies in this system, and there are traitors from both colonies here. We can't rule out such outside interference trying to damage relationships between us by targeting your people." "You never mentioned this danger," Brooks noted. "I should have been informed if you thought this was a serious risk." "I didn't think it was serious, only that we can't rule it out. I do have to add, though, Captain, that if your people have caused trouble, then they will have to face justice." "Justice like what you wish to do to Apollonia Nor?" Brooks asked. "Captain, that is an internal matter, and I advise you to stay out of it," the governor replied. "We are not members of the Union yet." Brooks leaned closer to the screen. "If you wish for membership, there are standards of behavior expected of you, not to mention standards if you wish to remain in friendly trade relations." The governor did not seem fazed by that. "I hope your people return soon, Captain." The call was ended. Brooks turned to see that Early was waiting. "I sent your message, Captain," he said. "Was there any response?" "Yeah," Early replied. 3,627 new civilians have transferred aboard the Craton as of 22 minutes ago." Logus looked between the two men in confusion. He felt certain that the number was not correct. He could not recall the precise number, but he did know that they were facing a net loss of civilian population. After the events with the Leviathan, over 2,000 were leaving. Brooks turned to him. "What do you make of the governor, Doctor?" "I firmly believe he's lying," Logus replied. Concern furrowed his brow and he shook his head. "He's playing some kind of game, I fear. Something foolish." "The man's been playing these insane colonial politics so long that he can't think outside of them," Early noted. "If he hurts our people, does he think there will be no repercussions?" Brooks frowned and considered a moment. "The man is either completely insane, or there's something important we're missing. I vote that he's suffering from a severe psychosis from his unhealthy environment. The state of his colony is abysmal. This place is dying," Logus replied. "No one could be ignorant of that, and yet he deludes himself." "He's legitimately desperate," Early said. "If things get much worse here, then there's a real chance that one of the other two colonies might step in, and his people might welcome it." Brooks was silent again, his gaze distant. "We need time," he noted. "Time to find our people, and time to convince the governor to let Nor leave with us. Time to find out what's going on." "Time gives him more chance to enact more plots," Early said sourly. "Yes, if he feels pressured," Brooks replied. which means that we need to make him think he's going to get what he wants. We can't just lie, Logus replied with a frown. If we make promises, we're obliged to keep them. I wouldn't lie, Brooks said, but time ultimately will play to our side. Early nodded and Logus frowned. Is that the significance of your question and the answer, Captain? A smile crossed Brooks' face. Commander Early sent the message to a specific transmitter on the Craton that we use as a way to signal there's trouble. Her response is not about people, but how many hours and minutes until she can arrive. Logus let out a laugh. So the governor gets excited thinking you might be willing to play his game, and you call for the cavalry. Yes, but she's 36 hours out, which is a long time for our people, and Apollonia Nor. Too long, Early noted. Captain, permission to send out our drones in a search and rescue mode. Granted, Brooks said. Aren't they part of the ship's security system? Logus asked. Concern creased Brooks's face. Yes, we'll be more vulnerable until they return. But our people are out there and we want them back. Early sat up suddenly, alarm clear on what was visible of his face. Sir, did you give Ambassador Kell permission to leave the ship? Brooks snapped his gaze to Early, his face tightening. I certainly did not. He shouldn't even be able to get out the doors. I just ran a scan, Captain, and he's not on the ship.